Yes, ma'am.
All right, we're going to go ahead and kick off the meeting. Good morning. My name is Monica Mancuso, and I'm here with St. Mary XL. And today is kind of like a historic event because we've never gone Facebook Live. So we're trying something new because what we want to do is really involve the public and share information with the public. But before we get started, we always need a welcome. And for this welcome, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to allow the speaker, Mr. David Hannegriff, our parish president, to welcome us. Can you ask him to unmute, please, Margaret?
There we go.
Good morning, Parish President Hannegriff.
Good morning, Ms. Monica. Thank you. And welcome to everybody. On behalf of St. Mary Parish, first of all, I want to thank St. Mary XL and Ms. Monica, President, and everyone else that, part of these meetings that we have on a regular basis. I especially want to thank those individuals that don't normally attend our meetings. Nichols State University, Dr. Clune, President of Nichols, and Dr. Jan.22 of Nichols. I want to thank you, the NERR group, Morgan Crutcher for the governor's office, and Kristen Ransom with NOAA. I want to thank you for being a part of this, and I want to highlight why I think it's so important for the NERR to be here in St. Mary Parish, primarily because of our central location. If you look at where St. Mary Parish is centralized to the state and next to the coast, you have the Rockefeller Refuge to our west, you have the Atchafalaya Basin to our north, you have the coast, the Gulf of Mexico south of us. I think St. Mary Parish would be an excellent place to have this facility. If you look at our participation and what we've done with the black bear habitat, you've seen our support of that, and you know that we're committed to environment. We are a community, a long history of fishermen, shrimpers, hunters. We know how important the environment is, and we know how important it is to make sure that environment is safe for our children going forward. So I think St. Mary Parish would be an excellent choice for this particular facility here. So I want to really hope you would consider St. Mary Parish for that process. Other than that, everybody, thank you for showing up. This is a great group. I welcome everyone here, and it's going to get a lot of good dialogue moving forward today. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, Mr. Hannegriff, thank you so much for welcoming us, and you represent St. Mary Parish, so it was so important that you begin our meeting today. So once again, thank you. We're going to get on with our agenda. And as you look at the agenda, I'm just going to remind everyone that while it has a 9 to 11 time frame, because it is a new experience, we are just going to take our time and share information. So those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, this is a local interest group meeting. So you might ask, what is a local interest group? A local interest group is people that we've been meeting with for like the last couple of years. We've met with the parish president, as he said, he comes together, the mayors come together, the Port of Morgan City comes together, South Louisiana Community College, which is located here in Morgan City, which is part of the University of Louisiana system represented by Tammy Moore and Anthony Baham. They're part of this local interest group. We have the Rig Museum, Virgil and Bryce, Cajun Coast Visitors and Convention Bureau, St. Mary Parish Chamber of Commerce makes it a point to be in our group, school board, and St. Mary Levy District. And also I'd be remiss without mentioning our state senator and representative. I know today Laura Meadows plans to be in on our meeting. So this is our local interest group. And it's important because there's no one person that can do whatever needs to happen to grow a really thriving community. We have to reach across political entities and across terms of office. So that's our local interest group. And we have to come together every now and then, and we have to share. But when it comes down to who is St. Mary Excel, I'm going to zoom in on this agenda for just a minute. We have a group of directors, and these, you can see our names, that's who we are. We started as mainly a group of teachers who, with the closure of a historic downtown icon of education, Shannon School, we came together. It was enough of a jolt that we got involved. So the closing of the school actually kicked off our organization. But we recognized very quickly, and that's what we've been doing since the pandemic, that we are not broad enough. So we now have some advisors, an advisory board, and we want to thank these people who have stepped up and made us more diverse and made us a better sounding board to receive and to convey, like be a conduit of information. We've got Lou Tamparello from the City of Morgan City Council. We've got Colleen Askew, thank you for serving, from the town of Berwick. Clarence Robinson, thank you for serving, from 100 Black Men. Peter Boudreau, thank you for serving, from Central Catholic High School. Amber Wilson from the Junior Auxiliary. Courtney Scola Long from Hoodstock. Lee Abear from Keep St. Mary Beautiful. Kimber Lynn McPherson and Leslie Washington from the NAACP. Evan Boudreau from St. Mary Parish Government. Vera Judicky and Cherie Leish from the Rotary. Leslie Smith from Morgan City High School. Reverend Marty Harden from the Ministerial Alliance. Now we feel like we've got a bigger conduit for information to come in and to go out. So this is who we are as people, but I'd like to just show you who we are as part of what St. Mary Excel has been doing. And I'm going to use this slide, and I want to make sure that it is showing up broadly and that we can kind of follow it, because this just didn't start with St. Mary Excel. The work here in St. Mary Parish, as the parish president alluded to earlier, has taken quite a bit of work to get here. And it's really been spurred on by the parish president and his council putting money into this Urban Land Institute report, which came out the report was in 2019. This has been 2 years. City of Morgan City, Town of Berwick, a lot of people contributing to this. And it's building the foundation for a new economy along the Atchafalaya River. It's a national report, and it's extremely important because it provides the expertise that's kind of guiding direction in this parish. And, resilience through the Future Land Use and Development Plan, recognized by the LSU Coastal Resilience Program, has been really great because they recognize that we are a coastal community. They recognize that we have resilience. And it's the Louisiana Resiliency Assistance Program, an initiative of the LSU Coastal Sustainability Studio. They recognized us in a case study. We did our ULI. Right after that happened, we had to make real strong partnerships. So we appreciate Dr. Clune. As the parish president said, we came together right after, as soon as this report came out. Here you see from the governor's office, Charles Sutcliffe. You see Dr. Clune. You see the Water Institute. You see the Port of Morgan City. You see the mayor. We had to really create partnerships. You also see Dr. Ducey and others coming to Morgan City. You see the Water Institute and our port director looking at our river. Really important process. You see St. Mary Excel on behalf of the community making 9 appeals, one of which was to NOAA, one of them to TIG. They're all listed here, but we've been making appeals and proposals to implement the work from this panel. And one of our great involvements came when we hosted a resilience lab. And when you look at this picture, these are students and you think, oh, they're so distracted. They're actually not distracted. they are engaged in pilot testing an instrument that they were piloting for the Water Institute, because these are coastal students. These are students that live here on the coast, and their work, as they input their responses through an electronic survey, was highlighted in a publication on quantifying risk and resilience. Here they are piloting this for the Water Institute. And this study was funded by the Walton Foundation and the Foundation for Louisiana. You can't get more authentic research than what was taking place in that port building in the spring of 2020. And then lastly, to tell you and share with you exactly what the organization of St. Mary Excel is because of this, we didn't quite understand resilience. So we looked to places in the country that had a resilience lab, and North Carolina had one. Dr. Twilley was on their board. Dr. Twilley is it's not a Morgan City, it is a Louisiana native from Sea Grant. And the more we got to understand Dr. Twilley's work and the work that he's been doing at the Wax Lake Delta outlet, the more we began to see the NERR. So much that during this last year, amidst a pandemic, a unanimous resolutions of support has been demonstrated for a Louisiana NERR by the city of Morgan City, the town of Berwick, St. Mary Parish government, St. Mary Parish School Board. And as parish president said, we're biased. We want it. We love it in the Atchafalaya Zone, but we don't know all the questions. We don't know the process, and we're not the one to ask as to where it's going to or where it's not going to. But we are advocating, of course, as advocates for the Atchafalaya. But to understand the process, we wanted to have someone today that could share with us. And with that being said, we'll now go into the second part of our agenda, which is NERR, and we're talking to those who know more than what we know, other than, we've shared what we know through this slide right here. This is what we know, that we are ready, we are connected, we are multi-agency, multi-university. So right now for this part, we have a moderator, Kelly Lynn Woodrow, who's going to share from the St. Mary Excel. She's going to assist as Morgan Crutcher from the governor's office and Kristen Ransom from NOAA share more about what this process is all about. We welcome you into the St. Mary Parish discussion.
Hey everyone, welcome to the meeting. It's so great to see everybody. Just real quick with Zoom, and just go through some Zoom etiquette. So we have everyone on mute, as Margaret said, to just get rid of any background noise that could come in. But we still want to hear from you, and especially if there's excitement, comments, questions, whatever there is, go ahead and put them in your chat box, which is down at the bottom of your Zoom board. And you could do it during the time the speaker is talking. And Margaret and I will be watching. I'll be watching on Zoom. Margaret's gonna be watching on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, you could comment as well. And we'll go through and look at the questions. If we can answer them, we will on our end. And then we will have some time after each speaker that comes on during our agenda to have a question section, and I'll come on and just ask those questions that popped up and try to get through as many as we can. If we don't get through all of them, we'll take them and try to get them, we'll work on getting them answered after the call and send them out to everybody. All right, thank you. And thank you for being here so much. And Morgan, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Kelly, I appreciate it. So first off, I'd like to thank Monica and St. Mary Excel for having Kristen and I here today. Thank you for convening in St. Mary Parish. And of course, thank you to President Hannegriff for that endorsement of citing a NERR here in Louisiana. We realize that there are a lot of parishes also with that same enthusiasm looking to cite a NERR in their parish. And so we just hope that that enthusiasm stays through to the end of the process. So thank you for your commitment to supporting the effort. Actually, so Kristen is going to be the first presenter today for this agenda item. She is our local NOAA, I was going to say affiliate, but she is officially now with NOAA, no longer a contractor, but a full federal employee. And so Kristen will overview for us first the NERR system and all the national benefits and the program as it exists today. And so I guess I would ask that, Kristen, if you could share your screen and unmute yourself.
All right, I am unmuted. Can you hear me? Perfect. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right. So thank you so much, everybody, for having us. I echo Morgan's thanks, and I'm really excited to speak with all of you today. As Morgan mentioned, my name is Kristen Ransom, and I'm with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. I am based in our Gulf of Mexico office, so my work covers from the state of Texas, actually on over to the east coast of the Southeast up to North Carolina and some of the Caribbean. But I actually live in Louisiana. I'm living in New Orleans, and that's where I plan to stay for the foreseeable future. So when the opportunity to provide some support for the Louisiana Reserve designation process came up, I jumped at the chance, and I'm really excited to be the NOAA point of contact for the process. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you sort of the high level overview from the NOAA perspective, why we find the reserve system to be such a fantastic place to work, and why reserve sites are so important to have, and why this partnership is truly an amazing partnership to be a part of. A little bit about how the process works, and then I'm going to turn it over to Morgan, and she'll give you much more detail about how the state level process works, because this process works differently in every single site that we work on. So first up, let me get my slides going. I probably don't need to go through this with y'all to tell you why estuaries matter, but I do want to cover just a little bit about why the federal government and why NOAA thinks that this is such an important resource to provide resources to. So they promote biological diversity. They are a key to our healthy ecosystems. They provide tons of community benefits, like resilience and storm protection, and huge, massive economic benefits. We have a ton of numbers inside our economic shop here about just the dollar value that healthy estuaries can bring into a state and to the country. And so these are crucial resources for us to make sure stick around. And so to talk a little bit about what the reserve system itself is, this is probably one of the longest names that you'll hear, but it is the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. Affectionately, we refer to it as NERRs or NERRs, depending on how you like to pronounce the acronym. But these are a network of 29 protected places in our coastal states and territories of the United States. You'll see here a list and amount of all of the places that currently have designated reserves. You can see we've got 30-ish right now, and we have a couple more coming online. So we're a pretty big system. If you come up, our first reserve was designated back in the 70s. That's South Slough, Oregon on the West Coast. And our most recent reserve that we designated was in 2017, and that was in Haiea, Hawaii. So we cover the range of different types of habitat and ecosystems in the country as well. And so what does this mean, having all of these sites in all of our coastal states? Well, this means over 1.3 million acres of estuary habitat protected. And I'm going to stop for a second and say I'm going to dive more into what protected means in a minute, because it doesn't mean, I think, what a lot of folks traditionally think of as protected lands, but we'll get there. But so these sites are dedicated to long-term research and monitoring. They provide education and training for a community's students, adults, coastal decision makers, really anyone who wants education on estuaries and habitat science can come to a reserve and get it. And then resource stewardship. So these areas are unique habitats that we want to make sure stay healthy for the long term. And so we do a lot of, the sites will do a lot of vegetation monitoring and those kinds of things. And so the vision overall for the system is that in the country, we have resilient estuaries and coastal watersheds where human and natural communities thrive together. And that's a key piece to this, is that siting a reserve somewhere necessarily incorporates the people in that area. And so the mission of the reserve system is to practice and promote the stewardship of coasts and estuaries through innovative research, education, and training using a place-based system of protected areas. And so that place-based piece is really important because what it allows us to do is to study, monitor, and understand the issues that are going on locally, the issues that are important to the people who live there, conduct the science that is necessary for that site, and protect those really unique local habitats. But we do this in a way and using methodologies that are consistent across all of the sites in the system, which allows the data that we generate to be able to be compared across regions and habitats and all kinds of ways. So it makes the data that we're generating nationally significant as well. And so that's what we like to say, is that the reserves are locally relevant, but nationally significant. So what does the reserve look like? I'm from NOAA, federal government. So what does that look like when we're talking about citing a reserve in a state? And this is truly a partnership here. So we have very different roles in the designation and operation of a reserve. But it is, when I say partnership, one doesn't really, NOAA doesn't really just come in and cite a reserve. We don't have any say in where it goes. We don't really have, prescriptive ideas about what should and should not be included in a reserve. We're just partners in the process. So let's talk about the state role a little bit. So the state owns the land and manages it. It very often provides the staff for the reserve. It's responsible for implementing the program, specifically the management plan for the reserve once the reserve is designated. And they also are required to provide a 30% match to the funding that is provided by NOAA for the operation of the reserve. And so the federal role in this is national policy and program guidance, technical assistance. So each reserve site has a dedicated staff member who's responsible for providing technical assistance on any sort of issues that arise. We're also there to sort of help with all of the financial and grant issues, because one of the big things that comes along with having a reserve is 70% of the funding for the operation of the reserve comes from NOAA in a cooperative agreement grant. And then we also provide program coordination across these larger national programs that I'll talk about in a moment. And so actually, really quickly, I want to go back because I said I was going to get to sort of what this means when we mention protected places. And it really comes down to that state role. So in this piece about land ownership and management, one really important aspect that we want to make sure that we are very, very clear about is that when a reserve is designated, there are no new restrictions on activities that come along with a new reserve. We rely on the state to manage the reserve, and we rely on those existing state protections and existing state management of resources to ensure that the reserve continues on. And so what that means, we'll do an example here. One of the reserves that I know that we work with that has duck hunting up in New Hampshire, that is an existing use that was there long before the reserve came in. And the state manages how duck hunting seasons work. They manage the licenses and the permits and all of that good stuff. None of that changed. There's still duck hunting allowed on the reserve. All of those permits are operated in exactly the same way. None of it changed. But what did change was at the reserve, there's now much healthier habitat to support more of those species to sort of enhance the duck hunting. So that's just a sort of real world example about what we mean when we say there are no new regulations that are put in place. Your existing uses of the area where a reserve is designated, they just don't change. All right, so when I mentioned that we were locally significant but nationally relevant, one of the things that comes along with are some national programs that we implement. There are 5 of them listed here. I will talk about them in any more detail that you'd like to talk about them in once we get to our question and answers, but just to give you a quick snapshot of what these look like. First, our system-wide monitoring program. This is a program of standardized water quality monitoring across every reserve in the system that allows for us to compare and contrast water quality trends across the nation, but also provides really, really important locally specific water quality data. We also have our coastal training program. This is a program that provides training and technical assistance to coastal decision makers in a community around the reserve. And so this is more of an adult education program focused on decision makers, policymakers, and anyone who has a role to play in making decisions that affect the resources of the reserve. And the point is to provide the most up-to-date scientific information to assist in that decision-making process. We also have our K-12 estuarine education program. This is our sort of bread and butter education programs for our K-12 students and as well as the teachers in the system. So we have tons of great on-hand educational events at the reserve. Very often there are visitor centers and exhibits for folks to look at. There are programs for students at the reserve to get out in the resource. But there are also what we call our Teachers on the Estuary program, or TOTE. And this is an opportunity for teachers to actually come out and learn from the researchers about how to do the science and provide standardized curriculum to implement in the classroom. We also have our Davidson Graduate Research Fellowship. So this is an opportunity for students who are in finishing up their sort of first round of postgraduate research to come out to a reserve and implement a project, specifically a research project that is going to advance the management priorities of the reserve. So a student is partnered with a reserve and they get a reserve mentor and are provided some funding to implement the project. It's a very cool graduate fellowship that just kicked off last year. So we have such an exciting cohort of graduates that we're working with now. And then finally, the Science Collaborative, which is definitely of interest to a lot of the researchers who are in the area, but this is an opportunity, it's a funding opportunity to conduct collaborative research on specific management questions that are happening at the reserve. And so this research opportunity is not just to do science, but it's to do science with the point of answering a very specific management question, and is done, as it says in the name, collaboratively. So from start to finish, really intense stakeholder engagement, and to make sure that everyone who's affected by the decision-making process is involved in the research from the very start. So those are some of our national programs. And what I want to talk about now is sort of what funding looks like. I mentioned that 70% of the funding comes from NOAA, 30% is matched by the state. And so this will give you a little bit of a sense of how our numbers have gone. These dollars are appropriated from Congress every year. And so we have sort of 2 pots of money that we work with. One is our operations, research, and facilities dollars. These are really just the money that is given to us to manage and operate the reserves. That pot of money that you see there, so in FY20, in fiscal year 20, it was $27.5 million, is spread evenly across all of the sites. And then we have our procurement, acquisition, and construction funds. These are funds that are awarded competitively, so the reserves do have to apply for them. And these are funds for things like land acquisition to expand the boundaries of the reserve, as well as monies to construct new facilities on campus or on reserve sites. Sometimes they are run by universities and are on campuses, but these are things like visitor centers and dorms for researchers and those kinds of construction projects, and then also for including more infrastructure. So for our system-wide monitoring program, if you wanted more monitoring sites or better equipment, you would use these funds for that. And again, as I mentioned, they're awarded competitively. So reserves put in applications for those, and they're chosen every year. All right, so here are the key steps of the designation process. And we are in step number 2. But first, the letter of interest. So NOAA has to receive a letter from the governor of the state expressing interest in designating a reserve in the state. We received that letter from Governor Edwards last year in November. And so, of 2019. Whew, the days are flying by. November of 2019. So that kicked off our process. And that moved us into the site selection and nomination phase. This is the phase that's really driven by the state here. And, you know, they set up the process for how they want to identify the site. They work with all of the stakeholders on the ground, and this is where we're at now. And so they put together a package outlining a site, where it's located, what the boundaries are, what the unique habitat is, and why they want this site to be considered for a reserve. And then that package is sent to NOAA, to the administrator of NOAA, and is either accepted or not accepted. The not accepting it doesn't happen very often. And NOAA is involved in the site selection and nomination process. Even though we don't have much of a hand in how it goes, we are involved as it moves along. So anything that might be sort of a showstopper or a problem in the process is brought up long before it would ever get to the point where it might cause any issues with accepting a nomination. And then once that happens, sort of NOAA kicks into gear maybe a little bit more than we do before, because we are required to do a draft environmental impact statement. And then we are also running concurrently with that. The state develops a management plan, a draft management plan for the reserve. And this is how the reserve will be operated and managed by the state as it moves forward. Once those drafts are completed, we put those out for public comment, incorporate those comments, and then move into the final environmental impact statement and management plan process. Once those are finalized, they go out again for public comment and federal notice. The NOAA will develop findings, a record of decision, and the state will develop a memorandum of understanding both with NOAA as well as with the various state partners on the ground who will have a hand in managing the reserve. So those memorandums of understanding are a very important piece in sort of understanding the sort of management framework of the reserve at the state level. And then once all that is done, we announce that we've designated the reserve, and then we have a big celebration, and that's the part that everyone really, really loves. So as I mentioned, we're here in that site selection and nomination spot. And so I'm going to close out with just a key couple of considerations for the Louisiana Reserve, and then I'm going to turn it over to Morgan to tell you about that site selection and nomination process. So one thing that is sort of drives the inclusion of a new site into the reserve system is making sure that we have unique habitats and areas that are not already represented. We want each reserve that comes into the system to bring something new to our body of knowledge. And so generally that's by regions that are already represented in a reserve system. So say there were no other reserves in the Gulf of Mexico, well, then we would immediately be like, that's great. We're super happy to have the Gulf of Mexico represented. However, the Gulf of Mexico is very lucky in that we have 4 other reserves, 5 other reserves actually in the Gulf right now. And so when it comes to identifying a reserve in Louisiana, the next step is to incorporate a unique estuarine habitat feature. So the process is each of the sites that are considered for that nomination will necessarily have to identify what that unique estuarine habitat feature is. And then the next thing up that is a huge key consideration for this process is the dynamic nature of the coastline. It's changing so rapidly that frankly, it's impossible to map really. And we have one of the most robust plans for addressing coastline change here in the state that I think we've ever seen. And so taking into account the planned activities in the Coastal Master Plan and how they may potentially impact a future reserve site is going to be something that we're going to have to consider along the way. The Coastal Master Plan and all of the resources that go along with that, the data sets and the online visualizers and all of that is going to be really key. They're going to be key resources for these sites as they develop. So just a consideration that maybe isn't always present in some of the other reserve designations that we've seen. All right, so I'm going to stop talking and I will turn it over to Morgan to talk a little bit in more detail about the state process, and then happy to take questions after.
Thanks, Kristen.
Screen lottery. Did I choose the right one? Does everybody see the first slide of my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yes, we can see it very well.
Yes, yes, Morgan, thank you.
Excellent. So again, thank you again for having me here. My name is Morgan Crutcher. I'm with the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, and our role in the site search here in Louisiana is to provide oversight and assist the lead agency, Louisiana Sea Grant, led by Dr. Robert Twilley, in the search. And so I'm gonna try and breeze through some of the system slides, but my role here today is really to provide a state perspective on this national program and the benefits to Louisiana, as well as what the site search is going to look like and how you can get involved. All right, so again, what is the benefit of a NERR to Louisiana? It's really, Kristen did a really great job of going over the program and what does this mean for us? This is an opportunity for Louisiana to join in a national network to tell our story, to talk about the unique habitat resources that we have here at the national level. And, you know, it's a state federal partnership that's really state driven, and it's really, you know, community supported. And so again, we're enthusiastic to see the support that we've seen across the coast for siting a NERR here in Louisiana. So the goals for the NERR are very similar to other organizations that already exist in the state. So why do we need this? Actually, because of these overlapping goals, right? So the point of the NERR is to have place-based research, to have place-based awareness, outreach, education, and, you know, have that research and education and training be longitudinal, so into perpetuity. You know, you heard that there's already a site, the South Slough in Oregon, that's already been on the ground for over 50 years. That is an incredible opportunity for learning to the local communities and to contribute to the scientific program here in Louisiana. And because it's place-based, all these overlapping goals with all these different agencies mean that that's a synergy that can be achieved here at the site. So specifically, what are the benefits to Louisiana? And the benefits to Louisiana are, again, telling our story at the national level, you know, highlighting all the efforts of restoration, protection, the unique habitats that we have at the national level, but also leveraging federal support for both, you know, new efforts and initiatives in science, monitoring, education, and outreach, and also existing efforts. And so that's really important for us here. One of the things that I think we'll go over a little bit is the cost share. So the federal government does leverage 70%. The state is meant to contribute 30%. And, you know, that can be in kind. So that can be the monitoring that is already happening on the site. all those can contribute to our 30%. So it doesn't necessarily mean a direct cash input. And of course, the K through 12 education. This is a longitudinal site. This is a site into perpetuity. And so the benefits really accrue over time to adjacent communities and to the state, and of course at the national level. The lessons that we learn here, we can then teach to the rest of the nation through this national program. One of the things that will be taken into account when we are looking for a site are the opportunities for education and research facilities. So these facilities can already be existing on the site, or there could be the potential for these facilities. It just depends on where the site is. And so you can see a list here of possible or eligible facilities for construction, should those things not already exist on the site, to be chosen sometime within the next year. And how big is this going to be? So you can see here a list of, I think, all 29 existing reserves across the nation. And you can already see that three of the largest are in the Gulf of Mexico. The largest is over 372,000. I think they've acquired some land since then, so it's really more than that in Alaska. And the smallest is about 500 acres in Ohio. The majority really lie within, this less than 20,000 range. The potential here in Louisiana, given the sites that we're looking at, we have the potential to be very large, but also depending on the site chosen, it could be very small. It just depends on how these sites measure up to the criteria that NOAA provides in its guidance for selecting a site. Some common questions that we get pretty immediately are, do we have to purchase land? Again, we're only looking at existing public land. So some combination of state and federal land. After we select a site, we can look at acquisition of adjacent private properties, but that is not going to be I would say, a significant factor in how we select our sites at this stage in the process. So we're only looking at public land. Again, Kristen went over this, and I want to emphasize this because I know how this is the point that I really want y'all to take home. The NERR will not add new regulations. So if there are consumptive activities like commercial fishing, recreational hunting, these activities, if they are already allowed within the existing state management land, those activities can proceed into the future as is, unless, of course, the state decides to change that regulation. But it would not be because of the NERR program. So I want to make that very clear because we get that question a lot. And of course, it's a state-federal partnership. The state runs the reserve. So we already went over this. So in July of 2019, the governor sent a letter to NOAA requesting, consideration for a site here, and NOAA said yes. So right now we are in the site selection process. All right. So what does that mean? So we have created our site selection committee. We call it our site development committee. There are site criteria that NOAA provides in a guidance document for selecting a site. Those criteria can be modified to be tailored to the specific context of the state selection process. NOAA is very keen on having significant key stakeholder outreach and engagement. Again, this is going to be a site that is on our coastline and run through this program in perpetuity. Or as long as possible. And so what's really important is to make sure that the state wants it and that the locals want it. And so that's something that they're really, looking for us to implement. And of course, there will be one public meeting with NOAA. So we're in that process right now. I'm about to go over it. At the end of that process, once we have identified a site, then begins, we have to put together a very comprehensive site nomination packet that is very technical in nature. So even though we've really emphasized stakeholder outreach and engagement, I also really want to emphasize the technical nature of the analysis that goes into identifying a site. There are a full suite of comprehensive weighted criteria that we have to score each site against. And that requires a lot of GIS facilitation and a lot of scientific experts looking at. And then, of course, Kristen has gone through the extensive EIS and draft management plan process, so we won't go into that. There we go. Sorry, folks, I keep skipping to 2 slides. So the current configuration of our structure for the site selection is the site designation leadership team that is made up of NOAA, GOCA, the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, and Sea Grant. And we are really developing and overseeing the process and guiding the other committees that will help select the site. The Site Development Committee is really the technical team that is responsible for pre-screening the coastal zone, evaluating those areas in terms of the NOAA provided criteria that are then state modified, and really narrowing down the full suite of sites that exist in Louisiana to like 1 to 3 proposed sites that will then go to the site evaluation committee that will then go to the governor for nomination. And who are the Site Development Committee? So the Site Development Committee is made up of 80 members. We have been selective in identifying individuals across state agencies, federal agencies, NGOs, tribes, universities, really trying to get a broad cross-section of coastal, local knowledge and technical expertise, providing input into the process and the site selection process. And I'm sorry, my voice may go out. I've got a little cold right now. So very broadly, I'm not going to get into timelines right now, but we are in the roadshow phase. So we want to make sure that everybody across the coast is really engaged in the process, or those who want to engage can choose to engage and are aware of how to engage, and really what the NERR system is and the site selection process. We are moving into the collaborative site development phase. And so this is where the Site Development Committee will organize into different working groups to evaluate the 6 identified Estuarine zones, evaluate sites within the zones against our pre-screening criteria. We know for a fact that there are certain there are certain sites that are just not going to be eligible because of some very finite definitive criteria measurements within the provided criteria. And so, we're going to look at that, kind of whittle down, get rid of the sites that don't have the basal elements of being a NERR, so that we can really start to focus on our efforts on those sites that really do have strong potential for selection. So the Site Development Committee will go through those sites, start developing candidate proposals, and then those specific site proposals will be presented to the public via town hall meetings in those communities adjacent to those sites. And in those town hall meetings, the public and communities will review the site proposals and provide input into those proposals and critique those proposals. And all of that feedback will go into the site proposal itself before it goes back to the Site Development Committee for review. And so, your input is important into these sites. We want to hear from you about what makes these sites really great, or maybe what makes them not so great, and even, any additional information that perhaps was not captured through the collaborative site development process. And so those will be later on in this year. Let's see. There we go. So what are the zones? Here are the zones that we're currently looking at. They are the Calcasieu Estuarine Zone, the Atchafalaya Estuarine Zone, the Pontchartrain, Barataria, Terrebonne, and Mississippi River. And this is just a quick construct to help us organize the various site configurations that we'll be looking at. Basically, so within each of these zones, we'll start looking at sites, and we'll go over what a site is in a few seconds. And once we have those sites identified and have eliminated those sites that do not meet the base criteria for a site, we'll start developing site proposals for the ones that do. And so each of these zones could have multiple configurations of public lands and state waters that could make up a site. And what is that? So, I'm missing a slide here. Okay, well, I will just say it then. So in each of these coastal basins, we're going to be looking for a combination of federal and or state lands not to exceed 49% federal. And they will be composed of intertidal wetlands representing buffer areas connected by public water bottoms that form an estuary proper of those core areas. And really, this is where Kristen's mention of the unique habitat really comes in. That's really going to drive what the configurations of these sites look like. And it's really important, again, because NOAA is the one who approves the final site proposal that we submit. And I've talked a lot about criteria. What are these criteria? The criteria can be grouped according to in the following 4 ways. So environmental representativeness, value of the site for research, monitoring, and resource protection, suitability of the site for education and interpretation, and acquisition and management considerations. So basically, within each of these areas or groupings, there are individual criteria that will be that the site will be scored against. And so we'll go over those really quickly. And again, we are still in the phase of modifying the criteria to reflect Louisiana's unique context. So the specifics of each of these may change, but essentially these are the characteristics against which each site will be scored. And so I've got them here. I'm not going to read through all of them. Certainly some of them that we anticipate modifying are a site's relationship to its influenced drainage basin, just because our coast is so large and the influence is so large. But you can see those here. And this is a very technical process, right? So we've got a lot of maps. We've got a lot of numbers and data sets that we can look at to evaluate these things. So what do we mean when we say looking at value of the site for research, monitoring, and resource protection? These are, examples of the criteria that are within this grouping. And so this is what we'll be looking at, right? So what previous research and monitoring efforts already exist? Suitability of the site for baseline monitoring, ability to address key local, state, and regional coastal management issues. And I think this is the one that people glom onto a lot because it's the most meaningful to them. But really, the diversity and quality of training and education. This is also where, so I talked about, I want to differentiate between the availability of facilities and the potential for facilities. So even though a site may not have existing facilities, we do want to recognize that there may be potential for facilities. And so we don't want to count a site out just because those things don't exist. However, we do want to, give credit to a site if those facilities are already available. It just makes the transition into a functioning NERR a lot easier. They'll also look at proximity and accessibility of site to researchers, educators, resource management, decision makers. So what does that mean? So I think this is important because this is attention that I think we've seen in a lot of other site searches. So do you put a NERR close to a large urban area where you already have a network of educators and providers and students, or do you want to put it in the remote, unique habitat where these things don't exist? And so that becomes something that really drives a lot of discussion, I think, near the end of the process when you've got, 2 sites that may be polar opposites in that realm. And so that's important to keep track of. And then, of course, acquisition and management considerations. So land ownership, etc. And again, we do look at compatibility of existing management practices and, consumptive and non-consumptive uses. But again, hunting, fishing, commercial fishing, if it's already existing, then it will continue to move forward. So real quick before we finish, again, this is a question we get a lot. And so I just want to reinforce this idea. So if these things are already happening, they will go forward. I know that everybody, when they think of the NERR program, they automatically have their ideal site in mind, and they automatically have a preference for that site. But NOAA has designed this process such that we have to look at the entire region. And so that at the end of this process, we can defensively say, like, we did not choose alternative sites for all these reasons. And so even though, we as individuals may have preferences, we still have to go through this process. It is a fair, impartial process. And the process can take anywhere from 4 to 6 years just to select a site. And here is, of course, all of our social media and the website. And on the website, you can join the listserv, and we'll be sending out regular updates once the site development committee starts rocking and rolling this year. And with that, I am done.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Kristen. I'm going to open, I see a couple questions came in, but if there's any other questions, pop them in the chat box. We have a few minutes to get through some. So Morgan, one question from Elizabeth Price is, how do we as citizens or community groups advocate on behalf of our area?
Right. So again, a couple of ways. So right now you are learning about the process and engaging in it, and that will make you better advocates later on. So like I said, it's a fairly technical process in the beginning. There are just some basal elements that sites will need to become a NERR. Once we eliminate those sites that do not meet those qualifications, then we'll go through the collaborative site development process. That process will see the site development committee, which is already made up of 80 members of the coastal professional community, providing their input. We think that's very important. They will also, during that portion, be reaching out to citizens, getting perspectives, sharing perspectives, and really at the town halls, right? So once we've gone through this technical process and we've identified, the top sites, whether that be 3 to 5 or 1 to 3 sites, we will come back to the citizens, to the public, and say, what do you think of these sites? Evaluate them with us. And we will go through the process that we, the data-driven process that we use to evaluate each site. And we will walk through that with the public so that y'all can also provide input. And those town halls are really going to be key, because that feedback will go directly into the proposal for each site that will then be considered for selection.
Great.
This is Kristen. One other thing I'd like to add to that is that having seen some other designation processes, it's really, really useful when the community that's interested in having a reserve cited there really understand the criteria that we're applying for citing a reserve and can provide those real examples on the ground of how your preferred area meets those criteria, and feeding that to the site development committee, really being able to show and make the case for why your place is the best place is really helpful.
And that can happen right now. Start
Absolutely. So I just put in the link to the chats a link to all of the designation documents. It's on our website, including the site criteria guidance. And so that's where I would point you to take a look through that. It can be a little dry because it is a federal government document, but it does lay out the criteria in detail, and it gives you a sense of sort of what we're looking for. But really, I'll give you the gist of it. Identify that unique habitat feature, and then identify all the ways in which the site that you want it to be helps keep that unique habitat feature around and available for long-term study. That's really the nut of it all.
And it shows us how to submit those criterias or submissions.
Well, I will turn that over to Morgan, because this is, again, that part is all the state-driven process. We just provide the guidance documents.
I see Morgan put a link too.
Yeah.
And so I've provided the link, and so it's, you can actually click on it as opposed to what was in the PowerPoint. But there you can see all earlier presentations. Again, we have a listserv, we have an email. So if you have thoughts, I'm not sure how or whether we're going to do direct solicitations to the public and what that'll look like. But when we do, if we do, it will be on this website. And if you are on the listserv, then you will get advance notification of that.
Great. We have another question. How competitive is it at this point with the site selection? How does it look?
So I think it's really interesting. When you first talk to folks, they automatically have an idea of what their ideal site is. But once they learn more about the criteria, then they realize how complicated it gets, because there are 4 different criteria areas, right, which each have an enumerated list of things that you have to look at. And once they start working through the complexities of, the pros and cons for each site, I think they realize how hard it's going to be to really identify a good site. We haven't, so our first step is to really just go through and use numeric criteria to define like what sites do have meet the minimum criteria to be a site. And I think Kristen can go over this a little bit better because it's a little bit more technical. We haven't completed that yet. So at this point, everyone's kind of in the game. So I would say we'll really see how competitive it gets once we go through that first kind of binary look and see who remains standing.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute David Hanegraaff. He wants to ask a question real quick or speak.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Ms. Ransom, Ms. Crutcher, I want to thank you. You did a great job explaining everything. And I also want to thank you for actually doing my job. You pretty much, most of what you said, basically put St. Mary Parish right there, as far as I'm concerned. When Ms. Ransom, when you mention uniqueness, okay, one major key thing here you got to realize too is that, of course, I mentioned the centralization, not only center of the people and population, but of universities, UL, LSU, Nichols, but also really that St. Mary Parish holds 2 unique factors here. The fact that we have 2 locations that are actually building new land. Mac Wade with the Port of Morgan City can attest to that we're creating land here. We're creating land here because we have fresh water from the basin, we have brackish water, we have salt water. We have it all, and let's study that. How about, wouldn't that be fantastic how we can replicate or do something with that and get it somewhere along our coast to help build our coast? And you mentioned infrastructure. 5 minutes in St. Mary Parish, any direction, and you can, it feels as though you're at the end of the world as far as the basin and everywhere else. So we have the infrastructure in place, we have everything there, and I know you hear this and you harp on this. But St. Mary Parish, I tell you what, this would be good. There's a reason. You want to hear our story? Our story is of oil field, right? Morgan City. First oil rig was built in Morgan City. Shrimp and Petroleum Festival, one of the oldest festivals around, is in Morgan City, which is why I think it would be unique here going forward. And we're really going to fight for this. But I want to thank you for your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, ladies. Let's see if I have any other questions. And thank you, Mr. Handegriff. How long is this whole process? The whole process?
So I think Kristen has a better idea of the process across all the each NERR selection designation process is different. So I think the range from getting a NERR on the ground is anywhere from 3 to 16 years, Kristen, but the average is 4 to 6.
Great.
Yep. And I will say that it gets a little squishy in some parts and sort of formalized in others. So this part that we're in now can speed up or slow down depending on how the process is put together. And then once we get to the environmental impact statement and all of that, it sort of gets a bit more formalized because there are, standard review timelines and things in place. But yeah, between 4 to 6 for a sort of the average.
Mm-hmm. But this is the most important part for like community involvement, right? Great. Would it be possible for one NERR site to represent data collection and research relative to 2 different proposed zones? By way of example, one zone that represents 90% of coastal and adjacent zone that represents a large proportion of coastal land loss working as one unit.
So Morgan, I'll take this one if you
Thank
want.
you.
And the simple answer is yes. The complicated answer is that it gets a bit more complicated when you structure it that way. We do have reserves in the system that are what we call multi-component. So there are multiple pieces across the state that make up the reserve boundary. Keep in mind when I mentioned that the money that goes to the operations of the award is spread evenly across all of the reserves, the multi-component reserves don't get any more funding than the ones that are just one big boundary. And so especially if those multi-components have different staff and facilities at each component, managing it can often be a bit more expensive than some of the others. So that's a consideration. But we definitely have reserves with those multiple components specifically to look at those kinds of factors, like, different processes happening at different sites.
Awesome. Another question is, what will it take for NOAA or NERR to know that our community really wants it here?
Well, I would say we NOAA knows. We're very excited. So I will say that we having this is really, really important. Asking us to come and present is really important. And, I think one of the things that makes or breaks a designation process is community support. Right. And so asking what you need to do to let NOAA know, just be engaged in the process at every single point that you see you can be, and really provide that support for when it comes time to identify the site. And that becomes clear almost immediately.
Okay. You have another question? Thank you. I think we have one more other question.
One last one.
Will St. Mary Excel have a task force committee to document real examples? I'll let Ms. Monica take this one.
Well, right now, I guess you can say we are the conduit of information just because we followed what ULI kind of started us on this journey. As the site selection committee starts narrowing down, I'm sure they will engage. I know that some of our elected officials are on various state committees. We'll kind of maybe pull all that together and see what we can do. But right now, we've made this a priority even going forward. While we set it for our 2020 priority, it's going to remain on our list. In other words, especially our task force members are our local interest group, it's going to come up on every agenda. It's going to be on. So, we will do our part for sure to keep it in the front of everyone's attention.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Monica. And then another question is, what is a possible impact that it could have on the local economy?
And maybe we'll make that our last question, Kelly, just because
Yep.
we need to
Time.
move. Okay.
I'm going to let Kristen chime in here, but first I'm going to say there is an economic report that we've been looking out for that should be released sometime in the next couple of months that does document the economic impact of a NERR to, well, 4 NERRs to 4 adjacent communities. And so, that could be a future presentation to St. Mary Excel once that is released. But I know that Kristen already has in her head existing data, so I'll let her jump in there.
Yeah, and funny enough, we are also working on a similar document, so we're going to be working on getting both of those out and to you. But I don't have specific numbers for Louisiana, but I'll tell you some of the things that we've seen on the ground from some of the sites. One that I'll just take Mission Aransas Reserve, for example. This is our reserve site over in Texas. It's a really great example because it deals with a lot of the same issues that I think that any site in Louisiana will have to, given resource use and the drawing of boundaries around infrastructure for oil and gas. But one of the things that we've seen is increased tourism to the area because of the Reserve Visitor Center. They were successful in getting what's known as Science on a Sphere, which is like this big globe that does these really cool presentations about a whole range of things. And so they've used that to their advantage to really drive up winter visitor numbers to Ariana Beach community. And so this area just sees so many people coming to the town specifically for that visitor center. They also have a conservation easement out on a ranch. It's a cattle ranch. And this area also has some active oil and gas going on out there. But all of that sort of set aside is the ability to participate in reserve activities through this conservation easement has allowed the owners of the ranch to start doing wildlife photography. And they've been able to utilize reserve resources, staff time, infrastructure money to help put up photography blinds. And they have a booming side business in nature photography that is actually surpassing their ranching and oil and gas revenues at this point. So they're never letting that conservation easement go. Let's see, I think some of the other things that we have seen happen at that reserve, the research that's going on there, specifically around blue crabs. So the Mission Aransas Reserve is located in right next to the Aransas Wildlife Refuge, which is where the wintering population of the very critically endangered whooping crane is. And so they've been able to do a ton of really innovative research around blue crab populations and the impact of freshwater inflows onto the blue crab population that's allowed them to make changes in management of those freshwater inflows that has then increased and helped the whooping crane population, which in turn brings more ecotourism because so many people come to this area to take a look at the whooping cranes. And then the last one I'll give you is they do a ton of harmful algal bloom monitoring. Again, they've leveraged federal resources to get some really state-of-the-art harmful algal bloom monitoring equipment there and have been able to predict Corynea brevis blooms and have been able to get that information out to fishermen in the area so that they can pretty actively either harvest or do what they need to do to prepare for it. So just some examples, sort of concrete, about how a reserve in place can really bring some economic benefits.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for being here today and supporting us and being with us. And that concludes our question and answer section of this portion. We're going to move to our agenda.